Hello, everybody. My name is Black280 here, and today we're going to be talking about Game Maker physics. Now, before this video starts, I wanted to say that I will be starting to do Game Maker tutorials soon. But until then, I'm going to talk about like certain things like variables and physics and whatever. So I want you to note the first thing before we actually get into the actual physics of Game Maker is that for one, Game Maker physics do not necessarily follow Game Maker time. What that means is that Game Maker time is measured in frames per second. So if you set the frames in a room to 60, it is 60 frames per second. So that's 60 frames all calculated into 1 second. And that's what most games are like anyways. So I know what you're thinking. Like, doesn't the physics engine work exactly like this? Well, for starters, no. For one thing, that is not the case. Physics work in a completely different way. Physics actually do not feel like this. Physics feel more floaty and more like there's less. Imagine Earth with about 15% less gravity, and then that's basically the physics for Game Maker. It feels much more floaty, and while that might give your game a little more depth, gameplay wise it kind of messes you up because you don't have as much precise platforming like in a standard platformer like this one. So, Game Maker physics basically is it's more of a convenient way because when making games like a platformer or something where you will be colliding a lot, you want a way to actually land on the ground without going through it. And depending on how big your game is will depend on how many objects you will use and how much ground that you will be using, because I doubt you're just going to be using one simple object for the ground all the time. You would want some variety, right? And unless you're using a tile set in which you could basically use any tile you want and then use an object and go over it, you're going to need to use multiple objects. And instead of trying to calculate or have code or something for every single possible collision, it is just easier to turn on the physics engine. So we're just going to exit out of the game right here. We're going to return. Don't worry. So if I go to player, if you turn on the use physics, you will see that this middle section opens up. And then you can click collision shape. All you need to do is select the collision shape. So I'm just going to do that. And then boom, you got your collision shape. And basically you can set the density, how quick or how fast or slow the character moves, and then boom, you've got your own physics. And you may say, well, isn't this a type of physics that the physics engine can do? And well, it can be defined as physics. It's not necessarily physics. It's more like code that is like substituting for the lack of physics in the game. Like, the gravity that you see that is being used in a game like this, it's not actual gravity. It's just the player really moving down. But it is made in such a way that it mimics gravity. It's not gravity, but it mimics it. So, this isn't technically physics. It's just a bunch of code that is made to mimic physics. It's not necessarily physics. So, physics, like some games might like to use physics, but most platform games probably won't be using physics because using physics kind of determines how your game feels and how it plays and all that stuff. It kind of determines what your game feels like. If you want a more standard platformer that is mainly focused around you dodging objects and escaping danger barely and complete to the end standard platformer. If you want something like that, you should not use the physics engine, as you're going to be floating more. It's going to feel more floaty. And there's ways to make a game feel more floaty and surreal without having to use the physics engine, which I will get to in another video. But as of right now, using Game Maker physics, physics may be useful and may be helpful, but there will be certain occasions where you just gotta do something similar to this, where you just gotta create from scratch your own physics instead of having to use a physics engine, because doing that will make your game feel less like for a game, you gotta know what you're stretching for. Like, you gotta know, are you stretching for RPG? Are you stretching for top-down shooter? Are you stretching for a platformer? Are you stretching for a more story mode like platformer? Like, has a story, but it doesn't really focus on platforming and obstacles, dodging, whatever. It focuses more on the story than anything else. Then yeah, you should totally use the physics engine or something else. But for me, I like to prefer to make just the standard platformer, and in which it is better to use a code like, let me just scroll down to the player. It's better to use a code like this. It's better to use a code like this. And that's all well and dandy, that's all nice and good, but the problem most people have with this is that they don't like to use code, because code is complex, code is hard, yada yada yada, whatever. Now, I can understand coding is very hard and can sometimes be difficult and frustrating, but I personally don't like code, especially Game Maker language, but if you want to make a game, sometimes you're going to have to work with what you don't like. So, I use this. And this code, it's not really physics. It can be called physics, but it's not really physics. It's like physics that you make from the ground. They're like homemade physics. That's what I'm going to call it. It's like homemade physics. Physics that you make from the ground up. They mimic physics, but they're not actually physics. So when you have a more reactive system like this, then you get mimicking physics. Like, it's not necessarily the exact same, but it feels like it, because you are colliding, you know. You get all this, you get all that. So it may feel like physics, but it's not actually physics. And doing this more reactive system can give you more of, like, it gives you more flexibility with your game, gameplay-wise. Like, you can add power-ups, you could increase the jump height, you could make more state machines due to the fact that you're colliding more. So, yeah, that's the thing. That's what I feel like is so good with Game Maker. Like, it gives you the option to use the physics engine or not. So that's all I really wanted to talk about in this video, just basic physics, and then next time I'll be talking about variables. Well, that's all for today, guys. If you like this video, comment, like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!